Officers, what is the meaning of this? Arrest them both, now!
Diane Whitfield's voice cracked across the lawn before the patrol car doors had even finished opening. Officer Trent Hollis moved first, boots crushing a bed of white peonies, hand already on his belt. His partner, Reyes, hung back a half step, eyes scanning the crowd instead of the man they'd been sent to arrest. "Ma'am, this is my wedding," Marcus Ellison said, hands lifting slow and open, palms out. Frosting from the toppled cake still clung to his cream-colored sleeve. "Not anymore, it isn't," Diane called from behind her fence, arms crossed over a blazer the color of old money. "Sir, hands behind your back," Hollis said, closing the distance, chest first, the way men do when they'd already decided who's guilty. "Officer, I'm going to ask you one time to slow down," Marcus said. His voice didn't rise. It never did. "Run the address before you do something you can't take back." "Save it," Hollis said, and reached for his wrist. Simone moved before anyone else could. Ivory gown fisted in one hand, she crossed the grass in 3 strides and put herself between the officer and her husband. "You don't touch him again," she said, and something in the way she said it, flat, certain, done asking, made even Reyes flinch. Behind the fence, Diane lifted her phone and started filming, chin tilted like a woman watching justice finally arrive on her street. She had no idea that video would outlive every certainty she had about that morning. 3 hours earlier, none of this had existed. Brookhaven Estate sat behind iron gates on the quiet edge of Charlotte. The kind of neighborhood where hedges got trimmed by appointment and nobody honked. Marcus's grandfather had bought the corner lot in 1974, one of the first black families ever let past those gates. 50 years later, his grandson stood under a rose arch in that same backyard, waiting to marry a woman who had already rearranged the shape of his life. "Nervous?" Simone had whispered behind the arch, an hour before the first car screeched to the curb. "Only about stepping on your dress," Marcus said. She laughed, low and sure, and neither of them looked toward the fence line, where their new neighbor stood on her patio with a glass of white wine and a growing list of things she didn't like about the cars filling the street. Diane Whitfield had lived at Brookhaven for 11 months. Long enough to learn everyone's names. Not long enough to use them warmly. At the mailbox, back in April, she'd asked Marcus outright what he did for a living. "Public service," he told her. "I keep it separate from home." It was the kind of answer that closed a door without slamming it, and Diane had never liked closed doors. By the time the quartet lifted their bows and Ruth Ellison dabbed her eyes in the second row, Diane had already made up her mind about the cars, the strangers, the noise. She picked up her phone. "There's a big gathering next door," she told the dispatcher, keeping her voice low, almost reasonable. "I don't recognize any of these people. My neighbors never had this many cars before, and honestly I don't feel safe. Can someone just come check it out? No break-in, no weapon. Just a version of the truth built to sound careful instead of desperate. The kind of call that gets taken seriously, precisely because it doesn't sound like a lie." 8 minutes later, 2 patrol cars turned onto Brookhaven Lane. Have you ever watched someone's life bend sideways over a single phone call and known there was nothing you could do to stop it? The quartet never finished the song. The sirens came first. Diane had done this before. Not with Marcus. Not yet. But 3 weeks earlier, when a caterer's van parked half a wheel over her curb, she'd walked out in her robe and rapped on the driver's window until he backed onto the street, apologizing for something that wasn't his fault. When a lawn crew showed up an hour early one Tuesday, she called the HOA before she called them. She kept a folder in her kitchen drawer, dates, times, license plates, a private ledger of everything she believed didn't belong. Nobody at Brookhaven had asked her to keep it. She kept it anyway. The morning of the wedding, she stood on her patio counting cars. 14 by 10 a.m., a rented tent going up over the Ellison's back lawn, workers hauling white folding chairs 2 at a time, a group of groomsmen laughing near the gate, ties loose, jackets slung over shoulders. To Diane, none of it looked like a wedding. It looked like something she hadn't been consulted on. She'd tried once to insert herself into it. A week earlier, catching Marcus at his mailbox, she'd asked how many guests he expected. He told her. She asked if the neighborhood association had approved the tent. He said permits were filed. She asked finally the question she'd been circling the whole conversation. What exactly he did for work, that he could afford a house like this at his age. Public service, he said. I keep it separate from home. She smiled the way people smile when they've decided not to believe an answer. Behind the rose arch, an hour before the ceremony, Simone adjusted the collar of Marcus's jacket and found his eyes already on her. You're staring, she said. I'm memorizing, he said, in case anyone asks me to describe the happiest I've ever been. She laughed, soft, and pressed her forehead to his for a second before pulling back to fix her veil. Neither of them looked toward the fence, where Diane stood with a glass of wine going warm in her hand, watching the quartet set up their stands. At 11:42, she went inside and came back with her phone already unlocked. She didn't say the word armed. She'd learned somewhere that specifics without excess sold better than exaggeration. She kept her voice low, unhurried, the voice of someone doing her civic duty and nothing more. There's a large gathering next door, she told the dispatcher. More cars than I've ever seen there. I don't recognize anyone. I know that sounds like nothing, but I live alone, and I don't feel safe with this many strangers around. The dispatcher asked if she'd seen any weapons. I haven't seen anything specific, Diane said. I just want someone to check. She hung up and finished her wine. She had no way of knowing that the call would be logged, time-stamped, replayed in a hearing room months later, in front of people whose names she didn't yet know. She only knew that somewhere behind that fence, a party was happening that she hadn't approved of, and now someone was coming to look into it. 12 minutes after the call, the dispatcher's voice crackled through Officer Trent Hollis's radio. Possible disturbance, large unknown gathering, caller reports feeling unsafe. Nothing about a break-in, nothing about weapons. By the time the words reached Hollis, they'd already changed shape twice, passed from Diane's mouth to the dispatcher's notes to the terse shorthand of a radio call, each version losing a little more nuance and gaining a little more danger. Hollis had 3 years on the job and a drawer full of complaints he considered unfair. He didn't read them that way. He read them as proof that people didn't like being told no. When the call came through, he didn't hear unknown gathering. He heard unknown, and his hand found the wheel a little tighter. Beside him, Officer Reyes read the same call off his own screen and said nothing. He'd learned, in 6 years of riding with different partners, that some things weren't worth arguing about before you'd even arrived. He'd argue later if he had to. In the backyard, the quartet lifted their bows. Guests found their seats and rows facing the arch. Reeve Ellison, Marcus's mother, pressed a hand to her chest and mouthed something to no one in particular. Simone stood at the far end of the aisle, veil catching a breath of wind, waiting for a song that hadn't started yet. Marcus checked his watch, then the gate, half expecting a friend running late. He didn't check the street. The first siren reached the yard before anyone understood what it meant. The quartet's bows stopped mid-stroke. Somewhere near the back row, a child asked her mother what that sound was, and got no answer, because by then 2 patrol cars had already turned onto Brookhaven Lane, moving faster than anything ever moved on that street. The cars stopped hard enough to leave skid marks on pavement that had never known any. Hollis was out first, door still swinging, hand resting on his belt like he expected trouble before he'd even seen the yard. Reyes followed a step behind, scanning faces instead of reaching for anything. Everybody stay where you are, Hollis said, loud enough to carry over the quartet's dying notes. Nobody move. 100 people in wedding clothes froze mid-motion. A bridesmaid lowered her champagne glass without drinking from it. Somewhere in the second row, Ruth Ellison's hand found the armrest of her chair and gripped it. Marcus stepped forward, hands open at his sides. Officers, I'm Marcus Ellison. This is my home. We're having a wedding. What's the concern? Hollis looked him over, the suit, the rings still boxed in his jacket pocket, the tent, the rows of chairs, and none of it seemed to register as anything but a story he didn't believe. "We got a call about a large, unknown gathering," Hollis said. "You match the general description we were given." "What description?" Marcus asked, voice level. "You know the one," Hollis said. A murmur ran through the seated guests. A few phones came up, slow at first, then faster. Simone crossed the lawn, gown gathered in one fist. "There's no gathering to report. This is a wedding. We have permits. We have a deed. This is our home." Hollis didn't look at her. "Sir, I need to see identification." "It's inside," Marcus said. "I'll walk you to it. My name is on the deed. I've lived here 2 years." "Sure you have," Hollis said. Reyes shifted his weight, said nothing, and reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder. He keyed it low, almost under his breath. "Dispatch, can you confirm registered owner at this address?" Static answered, then a pause longer than it should have been. Hollis didn't wait to hear it. He stepped closer to Marcus, using his height, the way some men use height, like it settled an argument on its own. "Rented tent, big crowd, big house," Hollis said. "People don't usually just end up somewhere like this." The words landed the way they were meant to. Guests who'd stayed seated began to rise. An uncle near the aisle came halfway out of his chair. A groomsman named Isaac took 2 steps forward and stopped when Reyes's hand drifted toward his belt. Marcus lifted one hand, calm, addressing the yard without raising his voice. "Everyone stay where you are. Let's keep this simple." Then, to Hollis, "I'll cooperate fully, but there's no crime here. There never was. Call your supervisor. Confirm the address before this goes any further." "I understand you fine," Hollis said. "I got a call, and you fit what I was told to expect." 2 houses down, an older man named Walter Briggs stepped onto his porch, phone already rising. He'd lived on that street for 30 years, and he'd met Marcus the week the family moved in. "That man carried my trash cans in during the last storm," he called out, voice not quite steady. "You've got this wrong, officer." Hollis didn't turn his head. Reyes tried again, quieter. "Trent, wait for dispatch. We don't have time to wait," Hollis said. "He's stalling. I'm asking you to slow down," Marcus said. "That's all I've asked since you got here." "Turn around," Hollis said. Marcus didn't turn around. He didn't resist either. He kept his hands open and said, "One more time, evenly. Please confirm the address first." That was the last thing he got to say clearly. Hollis reached for his collar and pushed him forward. Marcus's knee caught the edge of the gift table. His shoulder hit next, and then the cake, 3 tiers of white frosting, took the rest of the fall, smearing across his sleeve as a knee came down against his back to hold him there. The yard didn't gasp. It went past that, into something louder, 100 voices at once. Ruth screamed her son's name and was caught by 2 guests before she could reach the aisle. Isaac lunged and was shoved back by Reyes. Walter Briggs kept his phone raised from 2 houses away, hand shaking. It came, the click of a handcuff closing. "You are under arrest," Hollis said, breathing hard. "Suspicion of unlawful assembly. You have the right to remain silent." Marcus's cheek pressed into frosting. He didn't shout, didn't beg. He said only, low enough for Hollis alone to hear it, "You're making a mistake you can't take back." "They all say that," Hollis said. Then Simone moved. 3 strides, no hesitation, and she shoved both officers off her husband with a strength that startled them into stepping back. She pulled him up out of the wreckage of the cake, frosting streaked down his jacket, and turned to face the officer who'd put him there. Neither of them looked away. "You will remember this," Simone said, "for the rest of your life." Hollis blinked, thrown for half a second, then his pride caught up with him again. "Cuffs, stay on. He's coming with us." He took Marcus by the arm and started toward the car. The crowd parted around them, stunned, phones tracking every step. Marcus walked without a word, chin level, frosting dripping off his sleeve, the picture of a man being dragged through the wreckage of his own celebration. By the fence, Diane finally let herself smile the way she'd wanted to since the sirens arrived. She lifted her phone higher, angling for a clearer shot, certain she was capturing the moment her street got put back in order. She had no idea what she was actually building a record of. Reyes caught up to Hollis at the car door, voice tight. "Trent, dispatch came back on that address. You didn't hear it. Tell me on the way," Hollis said, and put a hand on top of Marcus's head to push him into the back seat. He never finished the motion. A third car rolled up the street, unmarked, slower than the first two, and stopped behind them. The door opened. A man stepped out in a grey suit, the kind worn by people who give orders instead of taking them, a badge catching the light at his belt. The guests who recognized him went quiet first. The quiet spread outward from there. Hollis, still gripping Marcus's arm, glanced over, irritated at the interruption. "Sir, this is an active scene. Step back." The man didn't step back. He crossed the lawn with his eyes fixed on the groom kneeling in cake and handcuffs, and his face went through 3 changes in as many steps: confusion, recognition, and then something that drained the color out of it entirely. He stopped a few feet away and said the only word he could find. "Commissioner." The word didn't land all at once. It moved through the yard the way cold water moves through a room. Slow, then everywhere. Hollis's hand went still on top of Marcus's head. "What did you call him?" "Officer Hollis," the man in the grey suit said, straightening. "You are looking at Commissioner Marcus Ellison, head of this department, your superior and mine." Nobody gasped. The silence that followed was heavier than a gasp would have been. 100 people and 100 phones, all catching the same impossible sentence at the same time. Hollis's face went the color of the tablecloth behind him. He can't," the call said. "There was no break-in," the man said. "There was no armed suspect. There was a wedding, and you put your hands on the man who runs this city's police force." For a long moment, Hollis didn't move at all. Then his hands started shaking. He fumbled the keys twice before the cuffs came off, his voice dropping to something almost childlike. "Commissioner, I didn't know," the call said. "I was just going off what dispatch gave me." Marcus rubbed his wrists slowly, frosting still clinging to his collar. When he spoke, his voice stayed quiet, quieter than before, and that was worse than shouting would have been. "That's the problem, officer. You didn't need to know who I was. You needed to treat me the way the badge requires you to treat anyone. You didn't. Not because of the call, because of what you decided the moment you saw my face." Hollis had no answer. None existed. The man in the grey suit, Deputy Chief Daniel Reyes Hart, though everyone at the department simply called him Chief of Staff, turned to the 2 officers with the flat authority of rank. "Body cameras stay on. Do not touch them. Everything from this point forward is evidence." Reyes nodded fast, something close to relief crossing his face. He'd tried to slow this down. He'd have a record of it now, under oath, exactly as it happened. Marcus looked around at the wreckage of his own wedding, the toppled cake, his mother crying 2 chairs down, Simone's ivory gown streaked with frosting, 100 phones still raised and recording. For one breath, something in his composure slipped, and the guests saw not a commissioner but a man who'd just watched the worst day of his life happen in front of everyone he loved. Then he closed his eyes, breathed once, and reached into his jacket, not for the rings this time, for his phone. "This is Commissioner Ellison," he said, once the call connected. "Badge confirmation, Alpha-14. I need internal affairs at my home address immediately. I've been the subject of a false report and an unlawful arrest, with roughly 100 witnesses on scene." A pause. "Yes, my wedding. Send them now." Across the fence, Diane had stopped smiling somewhere in the last 30 seconds. She'd watched the entire reversal happen in real time, and the color had drained from her face in stages. First confusion, then a slow, sinking understanding of exactly what she'd set in motion. The man she'd called a criminal ran the department she'd called for help. Quietly, she started backing toward her own door, phone lowered, hoping to disappear before anyone remembered her name. "Ma'am," Marcus's voice stopped her at the gate. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. You called this in, he said. You told them you felt unsafe. He didn't mention a break-in or a weapon, but you knew exactly what kind of response that phrase would bring. That's on record now. You'll wait here with everyone else. I was concerned, Diane said. I didn't recognize the cars, and You saw a wedding you didn't approve of, Marcus said, and you decided it didn't belong on this street. We'll let the recordings speak for themselves, yours included. Diane's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Simone came to her husband's side and slid her hand into his, frosting and all. Ruth made her way forward next, pressing a palm to her son's cheek, tears streaking down over a smile that hadn't come easily. New sirens rose in the distance, different from the first, unhurried, arriving to begin something rather than end it. Internal affairs was on its way, and with them came the beginning of a process that would take Trent Hollis's badge, expose 2 buried complaints sitting in his file from years earlier, and put Diane Whitfield's own recorded voice at the center of a criminal case she hadn't seen coming. Marcus looked down at his ruined suit, at the wedding ring still boxed in his jacket, untouched through all of it. He'd come into that backyard to make one promise. Now he was about to make a different one, to the truth, and to making sure the system that had failed him that morning didn't get to fail the next person quietly. Deputy Chief Reyes Hart stepped closer, voice low. Commissioner, I'm sorry. If I'd gotten here 10 minutes sooner... You're here now, Marcus said, and I need you to do this by the book. Not for me, for whoever this happens to next, who doesn't happen to run the department. Reyes Hart nodded once. Behind them, the guests were only beginning to understand what they'd just watched, and what was still coming. Once the cameras outside that fence line caught wind of a groom in a ruined suit, and a commissioner's name attached to a headline that would be impossible to contain by morning. The hearing room filled before the doors officially opened. Reporters lined the back wall. 2 men who'd filed complaints against Trent Hollis years earlier sat together in the 3rd row, waiting to hear their names read into a record that had ignored them the first time. Ruth sat beside Simone in the front row. Marcus sat among them, not as commissioner, but as the man this had happened to. The evidence took 2 hours to present. The 9/11 recording, body camera footage from both officers, doorbell cameras from 3 houses, a dozen guest videos, all matching, all consistent. By the time the last clip ended, there was nothing left to argue over. The board ruled on Hollis first. Excessive force, unlawful arrest. A documented pattern. 2 prior complaints, both involving black men, both quietly closed by a supervisor who preferred paperwork over accountability. Officer Hollis, you are terminated, effective immediately. Your case is referred for further review. Hollis stood, removed his badge, and set it on the table without a word. He walked out, a civilian. The supervisor who'd buried the earlier complaints was demoted the same week. Diane Whitfield faced a separate room and a different kind of reckoning. The district attorney charged her with filing a false report, a charge made heavier by the specific language she'd chosen, designed to sound credible rather than desperate. Her own recorded voice became the centerpiece of the case against her. Investigators found 2 earlier addresses, 2 earlier neighborhoods, 2 earlier calls about people who'd done nothing but exist near her. More than one official suggested quietly that Marcus could make this go away, seal the records, let it disappear along with the embarrassment. If I make this vanish because of who I am, Marcus told them, I prove I only care about accountability when it serves me. We follow the process. No exceptions. Not for me, not for them. Weeks later, he stood before the review board, the press, and the city, and didn't talk about himself. What happened to me was wrong, he said, but I survived it because I had rank and witnesses and a friend who recognized my face. Most people have none of that. They only have the truth, and too often, the truth isn't enough. He announced new policy that day. Officers would be required to verify property ownership before any arrest tied to a residence. Vague calls naming only race would be flagged before dispatch, not after. Body camera footage in misconduct cases would be released publicly, not buried behind months of review. An independent board, with civilian members, would oversee every future complaint, so no file could quietly disappear again. "The badge doesn't make us right," he said. "The truth does. From now on, this department answers to it, no matter whose face is on the wrong end of the call." Months later, the backyard looked whole again. String lights hung between the same oaks. White roses lined the same aisle. A new cake stood untouched near the tent, and this time, no sirens interrupted anything. Marcus stood under the rose arch in a fresh cream suit. Simone walked toward him in her gown, steady, unhurried, the same calm in her eyes that had never once left her, not even on the worst afternoon of their lives. Daniel Reyes' heart stepped forward when the moment came, holding the same velvet box, the same 2 rings that had waited untouched, through everything. "Took you long enough," Marcus said under his breath. "Wasn't going to be late twice," Reyes' heart said back. They said their vows in full this time. When Marcus kissed his wife, the quartet finally played the song that had been cut short months earlier, and nobody in that yard flinched at the sound of a passing car. Walter Briggs stood near the back, clapping harder than anyone. The 2 men whose old complaints had finally been heard sat near the front, invited by Marcus himself, along with a program he'd started weeks after the hearing, pairing long-time residents with new families, so no one on that street would ever again be treated like a stranger in their own neighborhood. A letter had arrived a few weeks before the second wedding. No return address, handwritten. It was from Trent Hollis. He didn't ask for his job back. He wrote only that he thought about that morning every day, and that he was trying to become someone who wouldn't make that choice again. Marcus read it twice, set it down, and said nothing to anyone about it. That night, under the same lights that had once framed the worst hour of his life, Marcus and Simone had their first dance, the way it should have happened from the start. No sirens, no cameras waiting to catch the wrong moment. Just 2 people and a song that finally got to finish. The truth is simple, even when the world makes it complicated. The badge, the title, the fence line between neighbors, none of it decides who deserves respect. Only the choice to give it, before anyone finds out who you're really talking to. If this story stayed with you, that feeling is worth sticking with for a second longer. Marcus survived his worst day because he had rank and witnesses, and a friend who happened to recognize his face in time. Most people never get that kind of protection. Most people only have the strangers standing nearby, and whatever those strangers choose to do in that moment. So here's the question worth asking yourself before you close this video. If you saw this happening next door, not to a commissioner, just to someone's son on his wedding day, would you have picked up your phone to record? Or would you have walked over and said something? Tell me honestly in the comments. And if you believe stories like this are worth telling, stay a while longer. There's another one waiting for you, right after this.